Every single grief is unique, and every single grief that you experience is unique. The way that I grieve my son is not the way that I grieved my grandmother. And so we need to make sure that we aren't trying to compare the two, as well as don't let anyone dismiss the way that you feel in your grief, right? Don't let anyone make you feel guilty or rush you or try to, encourage you to get back to normal.
Welcome to Financially Ever After Widowhood, the podcast where we empower women to take control of their financial future after the loss of a spouse. I'm your host, Stacy Francis, President and CEO of Francis Financial, an award-winning and nationally recognized financial advisory firm. With the help of incredible guests, I'm ready to guide you through this challenging transition. Hope Reger is one of the most inspirational women that I have ever met. She is a published author, inspirational speaker, and a grief advocate. She lives in Ohio with her husband, Mike, and has two sons, Brian, who's age 34, and Justin, who is forever 19. Hope recently retired after 27 years in the corporate world to focus on her nonprofit organization that you're going to hear a lot about today called Grief to Hope. And she founded this magical nonprofit after the tragic death of her son in 2016, who was murdered. Hope talks to us about the unique loss of losing a child. But this podcast is really for all of us who have experienced grief, whether it's losing a family member or a dear friend. And she talks about her journey of healing, her journey of hope. And she gives all of us listeners the formula that we can use to be able to go through our grief journey. And make sure you stay to the end, because Hope talks about how we can help others who are grieving and gives us the two key things that we should be doing to help those around us who are struggling, who are dealing with sadness, with loss, to be able to truly help them. One of the quotes that Hope most likes and ends every session of her Grief to Hope workshops is this: grief changes your entire world, but it can also inspire you to change the world. That's exactly what Hope is doing. And I know that by listening to this podcast, you will get that inspiration and healing as well. So without further ado, please help us welcome our special guest today, Hope Reger. Hope, I am so happy to be here because it is such a treat to have you on the podcast. You have so many fantastic resources for people wherever they are in the grief process. And I know all of you listening today are going to walk away with so many resources, but also with hope, with inspiration. And so welcome. It's great to have you here.
It is such a pleasure to be here with you.
So how did you get the idea and kind of start to get involved with creating Grief to Hope? What is your story? Because it's a big undertaking, and you have put so much love into this organization, so much time and so many of your personal resources. I imagine that you have a story that has really brought you here.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for letting me share it because it really sparks where the drive and the passion comes from, is my story. And so November 17th of 2016, I was the mom that received the knock at the door. It was 6:30-ish in the morning, and I looked down. I was living in a condo at the time, and I looked down and saw two police officers standing there. And at first, of course, I had two grown boys, right? And so I thought, what did these kids do? That was my first thought. Like, it wasn't anything horrendous or tragic. It was like, oh my goodness, one of the boys got in trouble, right? Because,
Yeah.
they're grown. And so I went down and I answered the door, and two police officers asked me if I was Justin's mother. And for me, I was like, yep, it's the young one, right? And so I thought to myself, absolutely. And they handed me a piece of paper, like a post-it, right? And it had a name and a number on it. And I asked them, what was this in regards to? And they said, the person is really trying to reach you. You need to give them a call as soon as possible. They had no idea what it was. So I again assumed if it was a tragedy or something severe, they would have told me, like in the movies and TV. And so I thanked them. I shut the door and I went upstairs and I thought, who's going to answer the phone, this early on a weekday? But they again said it was urgent. So when I dialed the number, the person on the other line answered Greene County Coroner. And so that is how I found that my son had gotten into an altercation with his roommate. The roommate, it was a argument that turned physical, fighting as men do. And then the roommate um, pulled a gun, put it to my son, and he shot and killed him. Now, the coroner was obsessively apologetic, and that he, just completely honestly could not believe he had to tell me this over the phone. And I was about 2 hours away from my job from our hometown where this occurred. And so I was in a complete shock. I was in complete emotional overwhelmed. I didn't know. I thought maybe he had the wrong number, the wrong Justin, the wrong Hope. I didn't know, where to go with this. And I was in complete denial and shock. And after a few minutes of assuring me who I was and that this was Justin, I began to panic, question everything that I've ever lived through, been through, and as well as I felt like I could fix it as a mother, right? I thought, just tell me where Justin is. I'll go and fix this. I'll take care of this. I will make this better. And of course, I wasn't able to. And there's that long road of grief that was ahead of me. And as the days went by, I grew angrier, more hateful, more dark. I was in a really bad place, very bad, dark place. As you can imagine, I was overwhelmed. I thought to myself, I'll never hear my son say, I love you, Mom. I won't ever get a hug. I won't ever see a smile again. And it was a very trying time in those first few months within the loss of my son. And one of the biggest questions was, how do I grieve? Like
Yeah.
I didn't know how to grieve. I didn't know where to go, I didn't know any answers, and nobody knew any answers that could give me. And not that I was even expecting anybody to know, but I just didn't even know how this grief thing worked. And so I was in a very ugly place. And I literally was to the point where several months later, because of a technicality of where my son stood in the home where the murder took place, he claimed self-defense. And even though my son didn't have any weapons, guns, knives of any kind, he was allowed to claim that self-defense. It was never indicted. It never even went to a jury, right? So now I'm in this place where I'm really angry. in a revengeful place. I hated everybody, everything. I couldn't protect my son from being killed, and now I couldn't even give him justice within that system. And at the time, I didn't think of it as a gift of not being into that criminal system, because as I've learned throughout the years that that could prolong your grief as well. Putting your grief on the shelf while you go through all of those legalities, those court hearings and all those things. And so I woke up and at the time, months later, I thought to myself, and I used sleep as a outlet. So I would go to sleep and take several naps through the day to give my brain sort of that release, right? And I remember waking up from a nap and deciding that it was overwhelmingly for me to make a change in my mindset. And I thought to myself, literally, this person took my son and I wasn't going to allow him to take any more of me, right? He wasn't going to take Hope too, right? And I had to make a conscious effort to figure out how I was going to honor my son and move from this dark place into something that I could fight for, that I could start to live for my son, with my son, being inspired by my son, and live for a way that my son lived for instead of the way that he was taken, right? I wanted to live now in his honor and how he lived versus how he was taken, and have those impacts to society and to the community for people that was the same as me in that ugly, dark place where you wanted answers, you wanted why, you wanted people to tell you how this grief thing worked, how it changes you, how it motivates you, but how it can also control your day, right? If you allow grief to take control, it will control everything in your life. And so I had to make those moves. I had to change my mindset. And so over several months, over several years, I decided that what I needed to do was to honor myself in a way that I could work my butt off in grief. And if I had a bad day, I could work through it, I could feel it, I could understand it, but I could also put a focus in getting up that next morning and fighting again, right? And that was the way I needed to look at my life. And I didn't know how that was going to work. I didn't know where that was going to come from, but COVID hit in 2020. And then that put that whole nother spin on grief. And I couldn't imagine the way I felt when it first happened and throughout the years and dealing with it within COVID itself. And so COVID put another spin, another layer on grief of isolation and alone. And people, we were counting deaths on TV, and we were functioning in a way of isolate. We couldn't even have funerals. Some were not having funerals, that closure. It was all those kind of things. And I thought to myself, how can I help? This is it, right? This is where I need to figure out how to help. And so I ended up putting pen to paper, and Grief to Hope, the program, was born in June of 2020.
In the middle of everything. Wow.
Yeah.
Something that you mentioned that is so insightful is how grief can take control. And I know a lot of the people listening today feel like it has control of their life. And it may not be every day, all day. It can be, but it's definitely, I think for every person listening, at least pieces of their day.
Mm-hmm.
How did you take back control from that?
Absolutely. So for me, grief you have to live with for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And so what
never
I had
goes
to,
away. Yeah.
it never goes away, right? And we need to first let society know that that is a myth. Time doesn't heal all wounds. It doesn't go poof. Like if you make it, because at first, when I first had grief, I was like, okay, if I journal, if I do this, if I do that, I'll hit this finish line, right? And it's not, there's not a finish line. What you have to learn to do is how to live within the grief, right? I have good days, I have bad days, I have ugly days. But what I've learned and what I've created with Grief to Hope is this program that basically it provides you with the inspiration and the focus to allow your mind to understand that when these days come upon us, right? And they will. There's no magic formula for these. And some days they'll be like a wave in the ocean. It'll just overcome you, right? But we have to rely on our whys and our priorities and our focus to be louder than that grief. Now, I'm not saying you don't feel it, you don't live in it, you don't, express that feeling. You do, right? But if you have a plan, a reason, a feeling, a why, a focus, which is what we're all about, that changes your perspective for the day, right? And so when these days come upon us, anniversaries, Mother's Day, those kind of first days of school, right? Those kind of weddings, all those kind of days, we have to mentally prepare for those days and make our reasons to get through those louder than the grief, right? And what I mean by that is I have bad days, but I have to make those days or even mornings versus a day that turns into 2 days, which turns into a week, which could turn into 3 months. And by the time we're all said and done, I've lost all my focus and my reason, and I'm sitting in this grief again, right? In the darkness of the grief. So if you develop that reason behind your day, whatever that is, and it could be something as small as I want to take a shower, or I want to go through their things, or I want to listen to a song, or you want to write a book, right? It can be anything you want for your reason. And then your why would be your loved ones or your family, whatever inspires you, right? That can take ownership for that day, that next day, right? It can get you through those times where you feel totally involved, totally engulfed in the grief to say, you know what, I'm going to feel this today. I'm going to be in it today. But tomorrow's new, right? And I need to reset and refocus. And that's where it all comes from. You just have to have that reason louder than the grief, than the excuses.
What would you say, like the one thing you would tell someone who's grieving?
So the first thing I would tell somebody is that it's unique. Every single grief is unique, and every single grief that you experience is unique. The way that I grieved my son is not the way that I grieved my grandmother. And so we need to make sure that we aren't trying to compare the two, as well as don't let anyone dismiss the way that you feel in your grief, right? Don't let anyone make you feel guilty or rush you or try to, encourage you to get back to normal. And I tell people all the time when they say this, my dad was the first one. He said, just go back to work and get back to normal. Well, that's completely different. I have a new normal, right? And I don't want to feel like I'm failing not to get back to that old normal, but now I have a new normal. And that new normal is now living for my son, living for me, and expecting joy again, right? But I'm also more patient, more forgiving, more grateful. And for that new normal for me is way better than the old normal. So I don't want us to feel like if we don't go back to where it was, that we're failing, because now we're creating something new. And most of the time it's even better.
Mm-hmm. And I think that it's so powerful, the words that you use. Don't let anyone dismiss the way you feel grief. And also I've heard that so many of our clients have said, everybody tells me to get busy, go back to work. And it's almost like instead of dealing with the grief, you're being told to put it in a box, close the box, and put it up on the shelf.
Mhm.
right? And just
Right.
keep yourself busy so
Right.
that you don't get tempted to look at that box and open the box top of the grief.
Absolutely. And what ends up happening is the frustration builds inside that you know you need to face that grief. You know you need to incorporate that grief. But if we keep putting it on the shelf, and a lot of times that happens, right? The first year, you're dealing with a lot of financial things. You're dealing with a lot of things, depending on who you lose, your identity changes. If you are the caregiver for your mother and that was your priority for an entire year, 2, 3 years, and then when you lose her, then your identity has to be changed, right? Who you are. You need to find a new identity. You need to find a new purpose. You need to find a new reason. And so a lot of times that can put that little grief on the shelf. And so we need to be honest with ourselves and know that grief, if we don't feel it and embrace it and we hide from it, it will find us. It will absolutely find us one way, shape, or form. And so I think that's when we really, and a lot of times the second year is the toughest, right? I hear that all the time within the groups. Like the first year, I was so busy that when it came to be the second year was the first time I started to really feel, right?
Mhm.
And embrace it. And it's hard. It's so hard. And you have to work every single day at it.
Oh, with your situation and many people who are listening, you weren't the only person impacted by this loss, right?
Mhm.
One of the biggest challenges that particularly women feel going through grief because we're such caretakers to help others. How did you do that? How do you recommend to to have that space and that energy and that support for your journey, but also you have loved ones, right? Justin's brother,
Mhm.
other family members, right, who are going through their journey too. That to me seems really overwhelming.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I want to make sure that everyone understands is you've got to be patient with yourself and selfish sometimes. And as women and mothers, we all put everyone's needs before ours, right?
Mhm.
Uh, and then we get sort of what's left.
Yeah.
And so, whenever that happens, you have to make yourself a priority. And that's where I say to every single person that's grieving, find a focus for you, one focus a day for you, however that works. However, if it's 5 minutes in the morning, if it's 20 minutes, if it's working out in the gym, if it's taking a bath, whatever that may be, you have to allow yourself that focus, that purpose in getting yourself to where you want to be. And you have to do it at least one thing a day. And then what happens with that is you build that momentum, right? For me, I had to be there for everyone else, and that was okay, right? But I also had to be there for me. And so I had to make a conscious effort to every single day do something for me and the focus of my grief. And it depends. And I still live by that today. With the program, with what I do, I have to do something for me and my purpose, my focus, my reason, because that gives me something to build upon.
Mhm.
And one thing we do in life is we don't take care of us, right? And we start to take care of everybody else, and we feel this guilt if we don't, right? But I'm telling you, if you take that one moment a day and allow yourself to fill your cup, whatever that is, and plan it, right? I know that I'm a planner, right? And I write every single thing down that I know I'm going to do the next day. And if it doesn't happen, okay, but I know that one thing I refuse not to let go, right? Even if it's 12 o'clock midnight and I haven't done it yet, I'm going to do it. And that provides me with that impact of saying, you matter, right?
Mhm.
And if you, I say this all the time, make your excuses bigger than your whys bigger than your excuse. Think about it as your loved one is saying, you need to do this for me, for you. This needs to happen. I want you to feel this today. And that puts that purpose behind the why.
Mhm. This is a question I don't know if you've ever been asked before, but grieving the loss of a child, how can that grief be different for other losses? At least in my mind, because I'm a mom,
Mhm.
just like you, like that, that to me feels like the biggest loss I could ever have.
Right, right,
And again, we're not about comparing, but it's different when you have a friend who is going through the loss of their child versus potentially the loss of their great grandmother, right? I mean, they're all losses, but
right.
the loss of a child is something that I think a lot of people are intimidated by from the perspective of how can I help that person? Because they themselves, myself included, um, sometimes will project that loss that person is going through on their own life
Mhm.
of losing, losing a child of their own. So, what would your advice be for that person, that friend, that family member, whoever that might be, who is going through this type of a loss and grief to be able to help them?
I love that question. And one of the things that I am striving to do is to allow people to be honest with their feelings when it comes to grief, but we don't talk about it. And grief's not contagious. I tell everybody, you can't catch grief from me, right?
Yeah,
Like that's one of
and Hope, I think that's what it is. I mean, I think I don't know about your journey, but I know that there have been many people who have had significant loss where certain people in their lives have all of a sudden disappeared.
yes.
And it's like they have COVID, right?
Yes.
Like you have COVID and no one wants to be around you, and you're not wearing a mask, so no one
You're
wants to be around you.
exactly right. You're exactly right. So I tell everyone, first off, you can't catch grief from me. Like you can't catch that from me. God forbid something happens to your child. That is the way that the world, the world, things happen for a reason. And so I tell people you can't catch grief from me. But one of the things that I love what you asked about is how can you help someone with a child loss? And this can be with any loss, right? But when you have a child loss, one of the different things is it's out of order. It's out of order of the normal
Yeah.
grief and death and how that all works, right? And so people who lose a child and people that lose great grandma, she's had a great life or.
Yeah.
But let me just say that if I'm very close to great grandma and that was my life and she was my mother and even though she was my grandma, I may have the same grief depth as someone that loses a child. I don't think there's differences between and don't get me wrong, I don't want to sugarcoat it whatsoever. It's very hard and it's very whenever you're grieving, and I tell everybody in our program that every grief matters, right? Every grief is important. Whether it's my son, my daughter, my sibling, my spouse, my parents. But there's a way in the way that life's supposed to happen that is not the natural flow of
Yeah.
life and how the circle of life works. So I think that throws it into another kind of category, maybe, if you will. But I think the best thing to do when you want to help someone in grief is two things. Actually, probably more than two things, but I'll start with is acknowledge the grief, right? Acknowledge the loss. And what I mean by that is when you come into that funeral procession or that phone call or that you see them on the street, don't ignore the loss because then that feels like you're taking that away from me, like you're not acknowledging my grief or my
Hmm.
loss. And it's hard, right? You don't know what to say. And so I tell everybody that I ever come in contact with, and this, if you take anything from this podcast, this is it. If you don't know what to say to somebody that's grieving, just say that because all the million I'm sorries are not going to be remembered. It's going to be that one person that said the most awkward thing that you're going to remember forever, right? And I have one. everybody I've ever talked to has had one. And it's literally somebody said to me, well, at least you have Brian. And I thought to myself, right? Okay, well, I would much rather have both of my kids, but it was coming from the heart. Like they didn't know what to say, right?
Yeah.
And I even had this just happened. I just found out somebody said to somebody who had lost their husband, they were young, and they said, if you lose a little bit of weight, you'll find love again. Now, this
Oh
is at
my
a funeral. Yes,
hope. Oh,
I'm not. And I've asked her if I could use this and I tell people this,
if you
but
would lose a little weight, you might find love again.
right, you'll find love again. Lose a little bit of weight. You're young. Literally, this woman is at her husband's funeral, and I said, "How much did that take away from your there
You're,
mourning? You could not
yeah.
function. Like I couldn't imagine coming back from that, right?" And so,
Wow.
whenever and I'm so passionate about this. So, if you don't know what to say, please just say that. I don't know what to say. I want to acknowledge your loss. I have no idea how you feel, but I'm here and I'm supporting you, and I'm so so sorry.
And
Right?
how powerful and heartfelt that is. Hope
Right.
that is so authentic, that is so real. And whoever's hearing that is saying, being seen, right?
Yes.
This
Right.
person is trying to see me.
Right. And that's where we
Wow.
have to be as a society to understand when you want to help somebody that's grieving is first things first, just be there, just support them, just say exactly what I said. I'm here. I'm acknowledging you. If I don't have what to say, I want to listen. I want you to
Yep.
feel like you can come to me, but also be there, not just day 3, 3 months, 6 months. It's those things that happen in year 2, year 3. I know one of the things that was so effective is first day of school without her spouse, right? She had lost her spouse and her kids the first day of school without their dad, right? Was so impactful. Now, if I write this date down and I say I'm going to reach out and say, "Hey, Hope, I know today is tough. If you want, let's grab some coffee, let's talk." That is going to mean so much more than what we call the casserole therapy, right? Where everybody brings you casseroles and your freezer gets full of casseroles. And in one week, you end up having to throw out casseroles because you can't possibly eat 300 casseroles. And listen, I'm all about casseroles. I can eat
Yeah.
me some casseroles. But it's those moments after that
Yep.
really make an impact on those that have lost and grief and be specific. If you want to help somebody, just say, listen, I'd love to bring you dinner. Tacos okay? Is there allergies on Friday night? Or if they have children in school, hey, I'd love to pick the kids up after football every day to give you a little bit of break or I'd love to come walk the dog, right? Give you a little break. Be specific in how you want to help them, um, and not put the burden on them. And so
Yeah.
the final thing I would say with that is when you want to help somebody, don't leave that open-ended question when you're at the funeral home that says, "Hey, if you need anything, let me know." Because one, I guarantee you I'll never ever let you know. Two, if I do, I feel like that burden is placed on me to come up with something for you to help me with. And so be specific, let them know, say, "I'm going to get with you in a couple weeks. Maybe I'll take you to dinner. I
Mhm.
watch a show, I take whatever it may be, but be specific. Um, and that is more super impactful.
That is so helpful. And I know all the people listening would love to know a little bit more about the Grief to Hope sessions, what they look like. Um, what does that look like? And, is it only for the loss of a child, or is it also for others that are experiencing other losses too?
Absolutely. So Grief to Hope is open to anyone that's grieving, and that is day 3 to 30 years. And what I mean by that is if you're still being affected by your grief and you need some support, some help, please take a moment and join Grief to Hope. We are we're online 7 weeks, 4 times a year. The program starts, our first week is an introduction, all about me, my story, basically what I'm doing here today. And then weeks 2 through 6, we spell out the word grief. So we have a main topic for every single session, and then we open it up. After that main discussion, if there's something going on with, let's say, holidays, Mother's Day, anniversaries, first days of school, graduations, weddings, anything that you're dealing with, you'd want to get some kind of experience and advice. And that's another reason why I say if it's been 30 years and you're going through grief, we want to hear your story. We want to know how you've gotten through those 30 years, because that will impact that person that's been there for 6 weeks, right? So they can see, how you've gone along your journey and where you're at and the things that helped you. So it's completely open to anyone that's grieving for any reason. It is spousal, partners, child loss, sisters, siblings, anything that you grieve. When it comes to loss, you're absolutely open to that. And then our final session of 7 weeks is sort of to hope. We talk about the next steps that we want you to take, and whatever that means to you. If it's like, hey, Hope, I want to write a book. Okay, let's put on some short-term goals. Let's write a sentence every day. Let's write a paragraph every day. Have that one focus we talked about each and every day to keep you and your momentum flowing. And so we do it 4 times a year. It's completely free. We're a nonprofit organization. I start a new one October 17th. We'll actually be doing it on Trick or Treat, Halloween night, and Thanksgiving. Even though those are holidays, those are impactful too. And so we want people to, if they want to join us and they have even the really tough Thanksgiving, or if they're alone on Thanksgiving, we want to give them the opportunity to share and to be with others as well. So it's an amazing thing. I'm starting to do some in-person workshops in our local communities with recovery, because I think that's important. But our main focus has always been virtual settings. So you can call from the comfort of your home with a glass of wine in your jammies, whatever makes you most comfortable. Cameras on, cameras off. We have a chat that you can talk to if you feel like that's more comfortable. Nobody's required to speak. And it's just a really safe space to get hope, compassion, inspiration, and support.
And is there a cost to join the sessions?
No, there's never a cost to join Grief to Hope. We are a nonprofit 501c3 organization. And so you join us. There is a workbook if you want to purchase it, but I can get sponsorships for that. If you're not able to and you really want the workbook, it's an optional tool. We cover everything that's in the workbook within the sessions. But again, if you need it to be sponsored, we will sponsor you.
And Hope, I wanted to ask that question because what you do, offering this as a free resource to people who is grieving, is magical. It's the most wonderful gift. And from one person running a nonprofit, Savvy Ladies, to another, right? There's so much work and so much effort and so many resources personally and quite frankly, sacrifices. So I just really want to honor you for all of that work and the impact and the difference you're making in people's lives. And thank you for that.
Thank you so much. Yes, as you know, nonprofit is not easy, and we are making moves and doing things that is impactful. And I think that I am here now to serve, and whatever capacity that is. But for me to help others with grief, and it's my purpose, it's my why, it's my reason, and I'll never quit. I'm going to keep fighting.
Yeah. I love it. Now, all of you listening, I know you want to know more about the different programs at Grief to Hope. So don't worry, everything is in the show notes. We have some fantastic resources for you, including a link to the program, Hope's website. They also have a fantastic Facebook, Instagram page, and LinkedIn. So there's just some great resources. Hope, thank you for being here. We are so appreciative.
I appreciate everything, and just your friendship has meant the world to me. I appreciate you so much.
Well, thank you. The 3-step formula that Hope used of reason, why, and focus is something that I think we can all bring to our lives to help us deal with grief, potentially the anger, the hate, the sadness that we're feeling. Hope brought just true authenticity and vulnerability in sharing her journey. And I hope that this podcast has done for you what it's done for me. And that is to really give the tools, the inspiration, and the baby steps that we can all use to deal with our grief, whatever grief it might be. None of us should grieve alone. And so I encourage you, please, to look up Grief to Hope. All the resources are in the show notes. And when it comes to the finances, if you have questions, I want you to know you're not alone either. Please reach out to us at www.francisfinancial.com or email me directly. And my email is Stacy, Stacy, @francisfinancial.com. I'm giving each one of you a hug and a great big thank you for being here for you, for being here for your loved ones, and for joining us for Financially Ever After Widowhood. Thank you. Thank you for tuning in to Financially Ever After Widowhood. If there's a question you'd love for us to answer on the podcast, we can do that for you. All you have to do is give us a call, and the number is 347-682-5580. Let me say that again, 347-682-5580. Whether you're working with an advisor or you're maybe doing it on your own, we invite you to reach out to us at www.francisfinancial.com, or you can email me at Stacy, Stacy, @francisfinancial.com. Our hope is to be a resource for you to help you also find a great financial advisor, whether that be with our firm or one of our trusted colleagues. Please be sure to like, rate, and subscribe to the podcast, and join us next time on Financially Ever After Widowhood.